Um, Essentially, this is a review of the results that participants received when they completed the survey, with special emphasis on those associate roles that are what I've labeled a name identifier. Just a quick recap. It's not easy to estimate the amount of associates, but I believe there's a couple of thousand out there. We surveyed a little over 200 participants around the world, but for the most part it came back as North America. It was not a survey of members of the Executive Search Research Consulting Group, but they were the sponsors. This community of people that are associates within retained firms is one of about 3 types of folks that are in the LinkedIn group. The others are freelance research folks, much like what my firm is, as well as people that are doing sourcing and candidate development within an internal recruiting team at a senior level.
Got it.
Here's how the responses break out. And we thought there might be more gradations at work, but it really boils down into 3 groupings: candidate developers, name identifiers, and knowledge managers. So your basic unit of an associate, someone that is supporting a partner in a firm, they've been labeled a candidate developer. And then depending on the levels of sort of division of labor, there may be additional associates who focus on different parts. The first thing that happens, but not all the time, is the development of a name identifier. So for example, I was at Korn Ferry when I started, and there were senior associates and there were research associates. And in a few developed practices, there were knowledge managers who were sort of the keepers of the information. So today we're going to be talking about the name identifiers. Okay, so here's how the age range experience plays out. Name identifiers are sort of right in the pack in terms of what the typical age range is for somebody. I think it skews a little bit higher right now because in the last couple of years there were some layoffs within search firms, and that's usually to the detriment of the name identifiers. But it's someone that's relatively early in their career up to an experienced person. The first thing you need to remember about being an associate is that most associates are working in a small firm. I cited Korn Ferry because it's a well-known name, but those large firms, Spencer Stuart, Heidrick, Korn Ferry, they are large firms, but they are in the minority in terms of what most firms are like. Most firms are 1 office, 2 offices, maybe 3 partners, and their structure looks pretty flat. They're working at the levels you would expect of a search firm: executive level, vice president level. When it's a director level, it's usually within an industry where a director level person has sufficient compensation to match to the minimums of search. Here's what a typical small or mid-sized firm might look like. You might have an owner, a couple of consultants, but often the associate role or function may not exist at all. If it does, it's often inconsistent. In fact, some of my clients are, when people start their own firm, they don't want to commit to a researcher full-time, a researcher being slang for support of any kind. As you get into larger firms, you start seeing an associate person dedicated to an individual biller, depending on size. And then usually it's an associate, no division of work there. As it gets larger, that's when you begin to see the development of a name identifier role. Sometimes it's a centralized group in one place. In other times it's in a local office. In my experience at a large firm, we centralized it for our practice group in one of the offices, but research as a whole was decentralized and around the country. One is being a generalist versus being a specialist. Many name identifiers are committed to being a generalist because they love the change, or they just haven't settled on some specialty. Now, specialty is a loaded word. When you talk to a specialist, then specialty becomes really specific. But for the sake of search, a specialist name identifier might be someone that spends the majority of their time, say, in healthcare, or the majority of their time in financial services, or the majority of their time with a particular functional area like HR. It doesn't mean that you're an absolute master of the subject, but you know your way around, you know the companies, and you can move quickly. As I'll bring up, that's kind of a key to success in search. The other thing about name identifier associates is that they carry a reasonable load of projects. It's sort of name identification work sort of belies juggling and multitasking. For the most part, associates are carrying a half a dozen searches or less at any given time. Largely because their work is often done at the beginning of the project and then they move on to another one, whereas other associates, those that are developing candidates, are often juggling more projects that extend over time. It's also, for the most part, compared to other associates, a pretty straightforward gig, so to speak. It's hard to do name identification work at odd hours, except for perhaps organizing. So most associates are reporting basically a sort of 9-to-5 life. Let's extend that. Let's call it 7:30 to 6:30, but still it's pretty standard. So here's, I think, an important telling slide. When we asked associates, what their career aspirations are. A lot really haven't developed a keen sense of wanting to be a partner. For a lot of organizations, someone that comes in as a name identifier, it just hasn't been exposed enough yet to know that they want to be a partner. So most have good intentions of either improving in their role or advancing to another kind of associate role. And for the most part, thoughts of becoming a partner are nascent, underdeveloped. But a good quarter or a third are not even committed to being in the search industry permanently yet. So it's a role that lends itself often to folks that are fairly early in their career. And when you ask associates what skills are important to them, they often cling to internet research skills, social media skills, because they feel like they're using them a lot, and that's the path. In reality, that's the skill that they need for the job at hand. I think when you ask other associates, candidate developers, and knowledge managers, that emphasis on research skills goes down. Even leveraging social media is not as high. Most other associates are primarily concerned with sales skills, knowledge of industry, phone skill development. But a name identifier is often perceived as someone who's quicker on the draw with the internet. Here it is. The compensation range for name identifiers has sort of a limit when one is within a retained firm. The kind of general average across this survey was a little under 50,000. There's a limit to how much a name identifier makes. I would say those that are above 100,000, I think we probably need to have a further conversation with that person to understand why they're making that much. Most name identifiers are about 45 to about 75,000 on a base salary. Now, this is a survey that went across the world, although it's mostly the U.S. But what I found is that name identifiers often support partners remotely. So it's fair to include folks around the world for this number, since really it's becoming a global market for name identification services within search. Here's a little bit about the bonus side of being an associate. I was a perfect example of this, by the way. When I started, I fell in an equivalent range on salary. I was the prototype of this. I knew I got a bonus. I really didn't know. Well, I was pretty sure I got a bonus. I knew people got them, but I didn't really know how it was calculated. I didn't know if they were judging me on my quantity, whether my boss just thought I did well, whether it was about the company. So I was the I don't know column here. And I think that's pretty typical. I mean, for the most part, name identification is being evaluated by people that never were one. is naturally going to be tied to company performance, but it is largely a discretionary bonus for those in this role, paid annually or semi-annually. But what it's not a commission, and it's also a fairly low percentage. I would say as a blanket statement, a bonus ranges from about 0 to about 15% when one is a name identifier. Now I want to emphasize two kind of key issues here, since this is sort of a recap of what was already sent out. The first, we asked participants about their use of information systems for search. And I think this slide sums it up perfectly well. So the orange and the blue, the orange and the purple represent relationship software. So for a name identifier, it's hard to see the relationship work. It's hard to see the partner recall an exchange with someone. But it says it all. That's what search is about, relationships. It's not necessarily about processing resumes, and it's certainly not about winging it on your own with no system. So a key thing to embrace and remember within search is that you're working in software that sets up another person to have an exchange. And I found that the keys to success for a name identifier are not just delivering pure facts, but delivering facts within context. Now the second thing is the notion of being a generalist as a specialist. I think this slide says it all. When we surveyed the candidate developer role, which many people would consider the next step as an associate from name identification, and we asked them whether you're a generalist or a specialist. Slightly more are a specialist. So here's the thing. Within the range that is base salary for one of these candidate developers, specialists make more. As soon as you move up in the range, even from just the 25th percentile to the mean average, you make more as a specialist because you're beginning to develop your practice. So the time to begin to think about specialization is now as a name identifier. The second thing is we went on to ask people, what's your compensation against what your specialty was? And the answer is that it doesn't matter in search. There's no correlation between a particular specialization and one's base salary or bonus, but there's a clear correlation with the need to have some specialty. Doesn't really matter what. Nor does it matter what level positions you're working on within Retained. Whether you're working at the director level or the executive level positions, compensation doesn't really vary. The only correlate in thinking about compensation as a name identifier is this notion of being a generalist or a specialist of some kind. So I promised a quick review here, and I think I've done it. So here's just a little bit about both the Executive Search or Research Consulting Group. If for some reason you're not a member of it, you might want to check it out. We now have about 1,500 members. The whole concept is to create a forum where associates can communicate in the executive search world, whether they're in a search firm, whether they're freelancing, whether they're part of an internal team. And about my firm, it's Strategic Research Solutions. Essentially, it provides name identifier and candidate developer support to search firms as well as corporate recruiting teams directly.